Guys, in the last session, we completed our discussion related to provider development. We created one REST API and we are able to test that REST API. In that REST API, there are two operations available. What is the meaning of operation in the REST API? Operation means one method that is available in the REST API. So that REST API is working as expected. So once my REST API is working as expected, we need to provide documentation about our REST API. Why should we provide documentation about our REST API? Right. Our API will be accessed by other company project. So the people who are going to develop consumer application, they should know about our API. What is the URL of the API? What operations available? What is the input? What is the output? They should understand that information about the API. To provide such kind of documentation about the API, we are going to use a concept called Swagger. Swagger is used to generate the documentation for the API in the JSON format. Okay. And in the Swagger, there is another concept called Swagger UI. So by using Swagger UI, we can test our API also. Currently, we are testing our API by using Postman. We can test the API by using Swagger UI also. Now let's go to our project. Let us see how to add Swagger documentation for our project. Okay. Now, in this project, as of now, there is no dependency related to Swagger. I need to add the Swagger dependency. Let me get it from Google. Spring Boot with the Swagger example. Spring Boot with the Swagger example. All right. Now, so Swagger generating response, Spring Boot with the Swagger example to generate documentation for our REST API. Okay. What are the dependencies that we need to add that you can get it from here? Now, Swagger Fox Boot Starter. If you are using Spring Boot 3.x, that dependency. If you are not using Boot 3.x, then other dependency will be available. Okay. So Spring Boot with the Swagger dependency. Spring Boot plus Swagger. Let us see here the dependency that we are adding. That is a Swagger Fox dependency will be available. So let me take this dependency, go to our project form.xml. After the Lombok, I'm adding dependency. So what dependencies I'm adding? One is Spring Fox Swagger 2. Another one is Swagger UI. If you want to generate only documentation, first dependency is sufficient. If you want to test your API with some user interface, then you can go for Swagger UI dependency. After adding these dependencies, we need to create a configuration class. In our project, multiple classes will be available. In our project, multiple classes will be available. For which classes we need to generate the documentation, we will specify that by using Swagger config class. Let me go here and click on this class, which is Swagger config. Okay. So in this class, I want to represent this class as a configuration class. For that, I will use one annotation called configuration annotation and enable Swagger config. This is used to enable Swagger 2. What is the meaning of that? This is a Java class. This Java class I'm using as a configuration class. And for this class, I need to enable Swagger. For this class, I need to enable Swagger. In this class, we need to write the method for which classes it has to generate the documentation. Fine. Public docket. Docker is different. Docket is different. Docket is a Swagger class. Docket is a Swagger class which is used to represent documentation of our API. Okay. So API doc. By using this docket object, I want to create the API doc. So now I want to represent the docket as a Spring Bean. I don't want to go for auto wiring because I want to customize the docket object which represents Swagger documentation in our application, I'm creating Swagger config class. To represent this class as a config class, I'm using the configuration. In this class, I want to enable Swagger. So for which classes it has to create the documentation, I'm taking that by using one method. What is the purpose of @bean? Come on. What is the purpose of @bean? That is used to customize the object creation. That method will be called by IOC container. IOC container will call that method. Okay, public docket API doc. Now here I need to create the docket object and I need to return that docket object. Return new docket. Docket type is docket type no, return new docket. Some parameter we need to specify for this. New docket, yeah, documentation type will be available .swagger2. Right. Now after this, I'm creating one object .api .select .build. So paths also we can provide .api .select .paths. .paths. I'm going to specify path selectors docket .select .apis path selectors any or base package. Return new docket object .select .apis path selectors .base package will be available. Let me check this. Return new docket. What this guy has written. .select .paths .build .apis new docket .apis is not available. .select .paths path selectors path selectors any build. Something is missing, guys. 1 minute. Swagger config. Yeah. Right. .select .apis. So in which package our REST controller is available? Right. That one I need to specify. So this is the logic that we are going to use. This is the logic that we are going to use to generate documentation for our REST API. Return new docket. Okay. Yeah. return new docket object, then dot select dot APIs. For the APIs, I'm giving request handler selectors dot base package. So this is the package which contains my REST controller dot paths, path selectors dot any dot build. Now, so what is the meaning of this class? This class is used to tell for which classes we need to generate documentation in our project. So I'm specifying, go to this package. What are the classes available in the package? For those classes, generate the documentation. Paths, path selectors dot any. In that REST controller, class is available. That class contain post request method and that class contain get request method. When I specify path selectors dot any, that means in that class for all the methods documentation will be generated. If you want documentation for only post request methods or get request method, you can specify. If you want to specify documentation for all the methods, then you can specify path selectors dot any, then a dot build. So this is Swagger configuration class, which is used to generate documentation for the REST API. In my project, there are so many classes are available. Is it going to generate the documentation for all the classes, or it will generate the documentation for few classes? It will generate for all the classes or for only few packages? Only for the package, REST package. In that REST package, there is only one class is available. For that class, it is going to generate the documentation. Let's observe how to write this logic. Public docket API doc. I need to return a docket object. That a docket object should contain the information about the API to generate the documentation. Are we going to generate the documentation for all the classes or only for the REST controllers? Only for the REST controllers. How can we do that? Return new docket, documentation type is Swagger, then select APIs, request handler selectors dot base package. I'm giving the package name in which REST controller is available. In that package, one REST controller can be available, multiple REST controllers also can be available. Then dot paths. What is the meaning of that? Path selectors dot any. In that package, what are the classes available? In that class, whatever the package is available, for those classes, you build the documentation. That is the meaning of this Swagger configuration class. That's it. Once it is done, let me go and run my application. Refresh, run as boot application. Let us see. Application failed. There is a issue, null pointer exception. Documentation, when I add, it is giving a null pointer exception. Spring Fox Swagger. Let me try this once. Yeah. Now our application started successfully. Tomcat started on the port number 8080. Sir, when I add that Swagger dependency, when I create the Swagger configuration class, I'm getting one null pointer exception that is related to URL pattern. So I have specified that MVC path match strategy and path matcher. Now let's verify it is working or not. localhost colon 8080 slash swagger hyphen UI.html. Perfect. Now I'm able to get the API documentation for my REST API. So what are the changes I have done? The first change that I have done, I have added dependency in the pom.xml. So let's go to pom.xml. I have added two dependencies. One is a Swagger dependency. Another one is Swagger UI dependency. Let me add that. So I'm configuring Swagger configuration. Can you tell me what is a Swagger and why we are going for Swagger? Swagger is used to generate documentation for REST API. Swagger is used to generate REST API documentation. Okay. Swagger is a third-party library we need to add in our project. Swagger is not from the Spring Boot. Swagger is not from the Sun Microsystem. Swagger is a third-party library. We need to add that in our project pom.xml. Swagger is used to generate REST API documentation. Swagger is third-party library. We need to add in our application. So what are the steps that we are doing to work with the Swagger? First one, add below dependencies in pom.xml file. If you want to work with the Swagger, then you need to add below dependencies in the pom.xml. Swagger and Swagger UI. Swagger UI, what is the purpose of that? What is the purpose of that? Swagger UI is used to test REST API with the user interface. Swagger UI is used to test our REST API with the user interface. I'm adding dependencies in the pom.xml. Then second step, create Swagger config class. Create Swagger config class. What is the purpose of Swagger config class? It is used to specify for which classes documentation should be generated. So this is my Swagger configuration class. With the Swagger dependency, we are getting a null pointer exception. How to avoid the null pointer exception? Note, in some versions of the Swagger, that exception will come. In some versions, it will not come, right? So if we are getting null pointer exception when we are running the project, if we are getting null pointer exception when we run the application, then add below property, add the below property in application.properties file. If we are getting null pointer exception when we are running the application, then add below property in the properties file. So this is end path matcher. Okay, let us add this property. Once this step is completed, then finally what? Run the application. Run the application and access Swagger documentation, Swagger doc and Swagger UI. Swagger is added in my application. How can we access documentation of the Swagger? Doc URL. In order to access that, http://localhost:/8080/v2/API docs. Right? That is the URL. Predefined URL will be generated by Swagger. By using this URL, we can get the Swagger documentation of the project. If you want to get Swagger UI URL, if you want to go for the UI, http://localhost:/8080/swagger-ui.html. Okay. So am I writing the methods for these URLs? Are we writing the methods for these URLs? Now who is providing these URLs? These URLs are providing by Swagger. Now let me take this first URL. Let me take the first URL, go to browser, hit that. What happened? I'm getting one JSON. That JSON contains information about the API. What is the URL of the API? What operations are available in the API? What is the input for the operation? What is the output of the operation? We can see that in the documentation. Now here you can see Swagger doc URL. This is called Swagger doc URL. And what is this? This is called Swagger UI URL. What is the purpose of doc URL? What is the purpose of doc URL? To get our REST API documentation in the JSON format. To get the REST API documentation in the JSON format, we are going to hit this doc URL. What is the purpose of UI URL? What is the purpose of UI URL? It is used to get the user interface. It is used to get the user interface. By using this user interface, we can test our REST API. Okay. Now see this Swagger. Swagger is used to generate REST API documentation. Swagger is a third-party library we need to add in our application. Swagger UI is used to test the REST API with the user interface. Add the below dependencies in the pom.xml. Swagger dependency, Swagger UI dependency. If you just add the dependency, that is not sufficient. Along with the dependency, what we need to do? We need to create Swagger config class. We need to create the Swagger config class. Now, so here I'm creating a Swagger config class by using a docket object. It contains for which classes it has to generate the documentation. When we run the application, then we need to add this property. Otherwise, we are getting null pointer exception. Okay. After adding that property, I'm running the project. This is the URL to access the documentation in the JSON format. This is the URL to test our API. Let me show you the JSON clearly. Go to browser, copy this JSON, go to your project. It's not mandatory, guys. Just I want to show you how that JSON will look like. Let me create one file, new file. I'm giving doc.json. Just I'm creating one file, doc.json. Keep that file, Control-Shift-F. So this is the JSON data that we are getting from Swagger. This JSON contains information about our API. So which version of the Swagger we are using? 2.0. What is the license? Here, host is available. What is the meaning of a host? Where your application is running. Where my application is running? My application is running in the local host. Base path is the slash. Here, what is this? Paths. Paths nothing but what are the URL patterns that are available in our application. So there are two URL patterns available. One is a slash ticket that is binded to post request. Another one is a slash ticket which is expecting path variable that is a get request. Okay. Now, if you go to the post request, it is saying that it will consume the JSON. It will produce the JSON parameters. For that post request method, parameter is body. In the body, it is expecting passenger data. And response, it is going to give the response as a ticket data. And the ticket method is available. It is taking ticket number as an input. It can produce JSON data, get ticket by ticket number. Consumes, but it is coming wrong. Why consumes coming for that? Did I configure consumes? No, consumes is not there for that method. Okay. Go to this REST API documentation, which method it is showing? Paths ticket post request method, consumes and produces parameters, passenger data is the body, response available as a ticket. This is a get request method, booking REST controller, produces JSON. This consumes should not come, guys, because that method does not have the consumes. Parameters, what it is saying, ticket number, it is taking as a parameter. So now, after this, it is defining what data will come in the ticket object and what data will come in the passenger object. Passenger object will contain these properties and what is the data type. Ticket data will contain these properties. These are the data types. Like this, provider application will give documentation to the consumer. So now with this documentation, can consumer understand what methods are available, what are the URL patterns, what is the input and what is the output, right? So better way is available, that is UI. If I go to this URL, let me access this URL. I'm going to get user interface. I'm going to get the Swagger documentation user interface. For which controller, documentation generated. For booking REST controller, documentation got generated. For booking REST controller, documentation got generated. What is the what is this? When I click on that, what it is telling that? Boss, there are two operations available. Boss, there are two operations are available. Show hide, show hide. There are two operations available. What are those two operations? Book a ticket and get the ticket. If you go for this method, if you click on this, it will show you clearly what is the input you need to send and what is the output you are going to get. So response will contain JSON format like this. Request will contain JSON format like this. They're clearly telling that what data we need to send as a input and what data we are going to get as a output. So let me test this. Now let me refresh this documentation. This is the URL. I'm getting the documentation. Show hide. Let me go for ticket booking method. That is my first method. Click on that. So it is saying that response class, response data, response schema. That means response structure will be available like this. That is the ticket data. And coming here, parameter. What is the parameter? Body. How that body will look like? That body will look like this. That body will look like this. Okay. Now let me send a request. Date of journey. Let me enter some value. Let me enter some value from HYD to Chennai. Okay. Name, sorry. Now to address some Pune. Train number. Let me give some value. Right. After entering the request data, what is the button here? Try it out. What is the meaning of try it out? Test it. That means send the request. So here there is a button called try it out. Okay. Clear the console. Clear my console. Now go to browser. Click on try it out. So when I click on try it out, what happened? What is the response code I'm getting? 201. What is the response I'm getting? Ticket data. Go to our console. Passenger data coming or not. That means we can test the API from the Postman or we can test the API from Swagger also. Now I booked the ticket. Ticket number I got as 1. Can I test the get request method now? Yes, let's hide this. Now get request method available. It is expecting ticket number as an input. Ticket number required. Give the ticket number as 1. That is a path variable. And click on try it out. When I click on try it out, what happened? Response code coming as a 200 and a response body also coming for me. Got it? So we are able to access Swagger documentation for the API by using JSON, and we are able to access Swagger UI. So Swagger documentation is looking like this. So this documentation looking like this. This documentation contains all the information about the API. We can share the Swagger doc URL for them, and we can share Swagger UI URL also. If we give this UI URL, they will get more clarity. Okay. What operations are available in our method? What operations are available in our method? What is the input of the method? What is the output of the method? That complete information about our API will be available in the Swagger. Are you guys clear? Good. Fine. Once this Swagger is generated, now we are going to send Swagger URL to consumer team. Then what consumer team will do? They will go through that documentation. They will understand how that documentation is there what operations are available, what is the input and what is the output. Based on this documentation, they are going to start consumer development. Okay, currently, where is my API running? Currently, where is my API running? Localhost. Can you guys access my API? You guys cannot access my API. Then what should I do? I need to keep my API in the cloud. For my API, documentation is also available. Okay. Let me remove the SOP. Good. There are two methods available. One is a post request method. Another one is get request method. And I have added Swagger configuration also. Swagger documentation is also generating for my application. Now I need to package my application and I need to deploy my application into cloud platform. As of now, you people don't know what is cloud, how to work with the cloud. So you no need to do the cloud deployment. I will deploy my API. I will give my API URL for you. You need to develop the client to access my API. Got it? Now let me do the deployment operation. Refresh, go to pom.xml. In the pom.xml, I will configure a tag called final name. So final name, I'm giving Spring Boot IRCTC API as the name. Okay, I am configuring the name as Spring Boot IRCTC API. So once it is done, refresh. Let me go for run as Maven build. Okay, I want to clean and package. I want to package my application. How Spring Boot application will be packaged? In the form of jar file. I want to run that jar file in the AWS cloud. Right. Application is packaging, build success. Once the build got success, go to our workspace, go to this IRCTC API. In that API target directory, in the target directory, jar file is created or not. In that target directory, jar file got created. So now let me go for my AWS account. Let me go for AWS account. I want to host my API so that everybody can access my API. Let me host that. Right. Sign in. Yeah, I logged in into my AWS account. In this AWS account, EC2 instances are available. EC2 instances, nothing but they are my Linux machines. They are my Linux machines. Now, I want to connect with this machine and I need to run my jar file. Where is the jar file now? Jar file is available in my computer. Where I need to run that jar file? In the cloud platform, I need to run my jar file. Okay, let me do one thing. Create one new machine, Linux machine. This is Linux VM. I'm creating one new machine, Linux VM, Ubuntu, T2 micro, key pair. Let me create a new key pair. Key pair name I am using SBMS key. SBMS key I'm giving, click on key pair downloaded. Yeah, launch the instance. I'm starting my Linux machine in the AWS cloud. Right, now I need to connect to that machine to run my jar file. For that I need one software called MobiXtrum. Let me go to Google and download MobiXtrum. That is used to connect from my Windows machine to Linux machine. Download it. Installer. Yeah. So this task is not required for you now. Okay, just I'm doing that for public access. It is getting downloaded, guys. Go to downloads. Meanwhile, let's verify my machine is started or not. What is the status of my machine? In the running status. I will connect to this machine by using MobiXTROM. What is the purpose of MobiXTROM? In my Windows, jar file is available, guys. Whatever the jar is available in the Windows, I need to upload the jar file to Linux machine. For that, I'm using MobiXTROM. Okay, I'm waiting for that download to be completed. Yeah. Okay, MobiXTROM open session, SSH, remote host, username of my machine, Ubuntu, private key. Let me take that file I have downloaded, chem file. Okay. Accept. Fine, guys. I'm able to connect with my Linux machine. Okay. In this Linux machine, any file is available or not available? File is not available. File is available in my Windows machine. From this Windows machine, I need to upload the file to Linux machine. So let me take this path, go to MobiXTROM, upload, select the jar file we have, that is irctc.jar, target IRCTC jar is available. I'm uploading that file. So do you know how to run the jar file? Let us check it. Here I'm having a jar file. Can you tell me how to run the jar file? How? Java space -jar space jar file name. So that is the command to run the jar file. Run that. What it is saying that? Java not found. I have taken a Linux machine. In that Linux machine, Java software is not available. We need to install Java in the Linux. Let me install Java in the Linux. Sudo apt install default JDK. Sudo apt install default JDK. Click on yes. It is installing Java software in my Linux machine. It failed. Fine, guys. Java installation got completed. Let's verify Java is installed or not. Java is installed or not. Java installed version 11. Now I have Java in my machine and I am having my jar file. How to run this jar file? Java space -jar space sb irctc api.jar. Okay, check this. Now, my Spring Boot application getting started in the Linux machine. Application will start. Application started. Application started. So once this application is started, go to the security group. In the security group, I need to enable one protocol. add the rule custom TCP. Our application will run on which port number? 8080. Anybody should be able to access with 8080. Done, guys. So go to this dashboard, instances, my Linux VM, take its public IP, then access our application. IP address, in which machine our application is running. As of now, what we have done? Localhost colon 8080. Why we have used localhost? It is running in the local machine. Now, it is running in the Linux machine. Linux machine IP address colon 8080/swagger-ui.html. Okay, I'm able to access my Swagger documentation. In which machine that documentation is available? In the cloud. Now, this URL, if I give, anybody can access my documentation. My REST API is available. My REST API is available. So that URL is accessible for everybody. Okay. Now, can you type in your mobile? Check it. Open browser. Online people, I'm sending in the chat box. You can type this, you can access this URL and verify. Is it available or not? IP address http://13.232.253.164:8080/swagger-ui.html. If you hit that URL in the browser, application will be accessible. That means Swagger documentation will be accessible for you. Swagger documentation will be accessible for you. Right. Good. You can test that API also. Now that API is available for public. Anybody can access my REST API and you can see my REST API documentation also. You can see my REST API documentation also. Online people, you can easily test my API by using Swagger UI. You can easily test my API because you have the access for Swagger UI. Eleven people already booked. Not coming means your URL is wrong. Check it. Online people, are you able to access? Yes. Fine, guys. So now I have deployed my REST API in the cloud platform. Okay. IRCTC Cloud API URL. IRCTC Cloud API URL is available. So now, who will use this documentation, guys? Provider will use or consumer will use? Consumer will use this documentation. What you will understand from this documentation? What you are understanding from this documentation? URL pattern, what methods are available, what is input, what is output. You will get that complete information with this documentation. So based on this documentation, we need to develop client application. So with this, we are able to complete provider application. That provider is running in the AWS cloud. Everybody, anybody can access my API by using that URL. Anybody can access my API by using that URL. Not only API, my API having documentation also, you can easily understand my API documentation. Are you guys clear? Good. So now with this, we completed one task, guys. With this, we completed one task. What is that? Provider development is completed. What is input for the provider? JSON data. What is output for the provider? JSON data. Is there any UI for the provider? No, it is a B2B communication. Provider running in the cloud. Why I am running the provider in the cloud? Yes, you people can access my API. Are you clear? Very good. Next one. In that API, I have added Swagger. What is the purpose of that Swagger? Swagger is used to generate the documentation for the API. Swagger is used to generate documentation of the API. Now, I need to develop the client application. What is the meaning of a client application? What is the meaning of client application? Client is responsible to access provider application. One application will communicate with the another application. I will develop Make My Trip application. I will run in the local. Make My Trip will have the UI. Make My Trip will take the data from the passenger. Make My Trip will send the data to the IRCTC. IRCTC will book the ticket. IRCTC will give the ticket for you. Okay, guys. So provider development is completed. That provider running in the AWS cloud. Now we need to go for consumer development. Tell me, who is a provider? Who is a consumer? IRCTC is a provider and Make My Trip is a consumer. Okay, now let me go for consumer development. Let me go for consumer development. Perfect. Simple. Let me go for consumer development. Okay. See here, who is the application? The application which is accessing services from other applications. The application which is accessing services from other applications is called as consumer application. Consumer application is also called as a client application. The application which is accessing services from other application is called as consumer application. How to develop that consumer? Already we developed a provider. To develop a provider, I have used REST controller. What is the purpose of REST controller? What is the purpose of REST controller? To make our application as a distributed application. Now, in Spring Boot, we can develop consumer in 3 ways. Not one approach, guys. There are multiple approaches available to develop consumer. In Spring Boot, we can develop consumer in 3 ways. 3 ways. First one is by using REST template. This is outdated approach. First one is REST template, that is outdated approach. And second one is web client. Second one is web client. This is introduced from Spring 5.x version. Introduced in the Spring 5.x version. And there is another approach is available that is called PN client. Another approach available that is a PN client. This PN client is part of Spring Cloud. So we are going to learn Spring Cloud in the microservices. When we go for Spring Cloud, if you want to access one application from another application, then we can go for PN client. Now I will demonstrate on REST template and web client. REST template is outdated approach. What is the latest approach to develop the consumer in the Spring Boot? That is web client. When the web client introduced in the Spring 5.x version. Let me show you one thing. Go to Google REST template. Okay. REST template. What is this? What is this? Official documentation of the Spring Boot. Now go to REST template. Go to REST template. This is official documentation. Okay. Now let us read this note. Is it Ashok sir statement or Spring official documentation statement? Official documentation saying that, boss, REST template available, but currently that is in the maintenance mode. In the upcoming versions of the Spring, that may not be available. If you want to develop the consumer application, instead of REST template, you go for web client. That is having more functionalities when compared with the REST template. Okay, now how many ways we can develop consumer in the Spring Boot? There are 3 ways available. What are those 3 ways? One is REST template, and the second one is web client, and the third one is PN client. Are you clear with this? Good. Now here, REST template will support only synchronous communication. Web client will support both synchronous communication as well as asynchronous communication. What is already we discussed in the project class, synchronous and asynchronous. That is different. This is different. Okay. So here REST template is going to support for only synchronous communication, whereas in the web client, it will support for both synchronous and asynchronous. That means whatever the functionality that is available in the REST template, same functionality available in the web client, and some extra functionality also available. So that's why what Spring is saying, boss, don't go for this. If you want to develop a client application, then go for web client. But some legacy projects are still running with the REST template. Latest applications are going with the web client. I will develop Make My Trip application by using REST template, and I will develop that same application by using web client also, so that you will understand both concepts. What about the PN client? Currently, we don't know Spring Cloud. When we go for microservices, then I will tell you what is the Spring Cloud and how to work with the Spring Cloud. Are you clear? Right. Tell me, what is a consumer? What is consumer? The application which is accessing services from other applications is called as consumer application. In the Spring Boot, we can develop consumer in 3 ways. One is by using REST template, another one is by using web client, third one is by using PN client. Now we will get more interesting concept. What is that interesting topic? I will develop Make My Trip application in my system. I will run that project in my system. But where is the logic to book the ticket? IRCTC. The application which is running in my system should communicate with the application which is running in the AWS cloud. So that is called distributed application. What is the meaning of distributed application? One application will communicate with the another application. Are you clear? Now, what I want to do for Make My Trip development, observe. I want to develop Make My Trip application with a UI. Why UI? To take the passenger data. We need the UI to take the passenger data. So here, first of all, let me show you that my IRCTC API running in the cloud platform. In the AWS cloud, IRCTC API running. Do you know URL of that API? Do you know documentation of that API? Yes, Swagger documentation available for the API. That is a public API as of now. As of now, it is a public API. What is the meaning of public API? Anybody can access. But in the real time, In the real time, anybody can access that? No. Then we need to implement a security. That's where Spring Security comes into picture. Currently, anyone can access our API because it is a public. I have given the URL also. But in the real time, APIs cannot be accessed by everyone. For every API, security will be available. That we are going to implement by using Spring Security concept. So Spring Security, Spring Cloud, we are going to discuss in the upcoming classes. Currently API available. This API is running in the AWS cloud. Assume that. Not assuming, it's already running. Right. Now I need to develop my Make My Trip application, guys. Make My Trip application is a client application now. In this Make My Trip application, I will develop UI page. In Make My Trip application, I will develop UI page. That UI page is used to take the data from the passenger. Take the data from the passenger. From the UI, that request will come to controller class. Make My Trip will have a controller class to handle the request and response. Controller class will be available. Now, I'm going to write the request and response logic in the controller. I will take one service class. I will take one service class. Inside the service class, I will write the logic for communication. Inside the service class, I will write the logic for the communication. So now here, end user will be available. End user is going to access Make My Trip application. This is Make My Trip application. This is Make My Trip application. Okay. So Make My Trip application having the UI. So here end user will be available. That end user is going to communicate with Make My Trip and he will give the data for his booking. Then Make My Trip UI application, Make My Trip application will take the data from the user and it will give the data to the controller. User will communicate with this UI application. Okay. Then that UI application is going to communicate with the controller class. What that controller will do? Controller will talk to service class. Now, inside the service, I will write the logic to communicate with the IRCTC. Inside the service, the logic will be available. IRCTC will send IRCTC application we will access from our service layer. From our service layer, we are going to access IRCTC API. When I am accessing IRCTC API, I will send a request with the passenger data. Then what the IRCTC will do? IRCTC will send me the response with the ticket data. IRCTC will send the response to my service class. Now, service class will give the response back to controller. Controller will give the response back to UI. UI will give the response back to end user. That is the process. So now we need to develop our Make My Trip application like this. So in this application, UI will be available. That is a time leap that will contain a form to capture the passenger data. Passenger data will go to controller in the Make My Trip. Make My Trip controller will talk to Make My Trip service. Make My Trip service will use either REST template or web client or PN client. By using any one of that, we can send a request to the IRCTC and we can get the response from the IRCTC. Whatever the response we are getting from the IRCTC, I will give it to controller. Controller will give to UI. UI will give to end user. Provider is ready. Now we need to go for consumer development. Look at the diagram. Yes, guys, you got the clarity? Yes, provider application running in the cloud platform. Now we need to develop our consumer application. So consumer application will contain user interface. That means a form will be available. Take passenger data, name, from address, to address, journey date, and train number. So after giving that data, when they click on submit button, request will go to controller. Controller will call the service method. Service method will call the IRCTC API by sending the passenger data in the request body. Okay. Then IRCTC API will give the ticket data in the JSON. That ticket JSON will be converted to ticket object, will be converted to control, go to controller, controller to UI, UI to end user. Clear? Now, how I want the UI, you need to develop a form like this. First of all, I want you to develop one page like this. UI page should be available like this. In this UI page, you need to take fields, name, passenger data. What are the data that is required? Name, then from, to, date of journey, then train number. Train number. Train number. All are normal text fields only. Normal text fields only. Take the name, from address, to address, date of journey, and train number. Okay. And here there will be a button, book ticket. There will be a button, book ticket. So now, once you click on this button, book ticket, it should give the response saying that your ticket booked successfully. It should give you a message, ticket booked successfully. So now, and I want one more page here. That page is search ticket or get a ticket. I need to write, I want you to develop one more screen, that is get a ticket, because ticket booking completed 1 week back. Now I want to get my ticket. Okay. So here get a ticket page will be available. For that get a ticket page, here I am going to ask ticket number. So when the ticket booking is completed, it will ask your ticket, it will give you the ticket number for you, and you need to enter your ticket number, and you need to click on search button, or you need to click on get a ticket. You need to write get ticket information. Now, so there will be a button called get ticket. So whenever you click on the button, then here display ticket information. Here I need to display ticket data. That's it. So 2 pages will be available. One page is used to book the ticket. Another page is used to get the ticket based on the ticket number. This is my page 1, I can say this is index.jsp. I can say this is my index.jsp. Book ticket will be available, and this is another page that we can say ticket.jsp, something like this. Sorry, time leaf, not JSP, time leaf, HTML. This is my index.html, and this is my ticket.html. Index.html and ticket.html will be available. Somewhere you can give the option already booked, get ticket. One hyperlink will be available, get ticket, something like this. When you click on that hyperlink, you will go to second page. When you click on the hyperlink, you will go to second page. In that second page, you enter the ticket number, click on the get ticket button. Then it should talk to IRCTC API, get the ticket data based on the ticket number, and display that ticket data in the web page. So tomorrow we are going to work on this project. We are going to develop Make My Trip application. Basically, I want to develop a client. My client application will look like this. One UI page or two UI pages. Two UI pages will be available. That means here I can say one more UI page will be available. I can say one more UI page will be available. So this is also another UI. So now client can book the ticket with that first method, first UI, and client can get the ticket with the second one as well. So request can go to this one, and response also will come from this one. Okay, this UI also will talk to a controller, same controller, one controller only. That controller will talk to service, service will talk to IRCTC API. So like this, I'm going to develop two UI pages. One is used for booking the ticket, another one is used for getting the ticket. So before coming to tomorrow's class, I just want you people to develop application, forms, capture the data, get the data to the controller. Once you get the data to the controller, then I will tell you how to develop service to access IRCTC API. So can you guys develop a project with 2 screens? Now it is a bacha requirement, developing the form, capturing the form data. So one binding class is required for passenger, another binding class is required for the ticket. Consumer side also 2 binding classes we have to create. The development I will explain tomorrow. You just to create the project, and you create the pages, and you create the controller. No need to write the service layer, just to display the form, capture the form data. So tomorrow I will explain service layer development to communicate with the IRCTC API. Got it? Yes, good. Sorry? No database, nothing. Why you need map? In the client side, nothing is required, right? That is just a form binding object. That's it. You capture the data, give it to IRCTC. No need to save. Okay. Yes. Online people, anybody having any question? Online students, anybody having any questions?
Sir, in cloud platform, there is a IRCTC application also, sir.
Right.
In that there is no database, no. How it is storing the data, sir?
How it is storing the data in the IRCTC? I am using a map in the service class, na? In this map, it is storing the data.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Sir, how you know, sir, the 12 members are booked the ticket?
Somebody told ticket ID they got 12. The ticket ID is incremental, na? Number 1, 2, 3, 4 onwards. I'm using 1. If you book, it will become 2, 13. I mean, I got the ticket number as 13. That means 13 people already booked it. 13 people already tested that.
Okay, sir. You got the notification.
No. I don't have any notification, man. Somebody told that.
Okay.
There is no notification.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, is there any limitations of map, like how much data we can store in the map?
No, sir. Collections are growable in nature, right?
Okay, sir.
no
In
limitation.
real time also, can we use map instead of
No,
database?
sir. In the real time, we don't use map. We will use database. Okay. This is just for dummy, na? To understand booking and getting the ticket. That's it. In the real time, we will use the database. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone from online? Anyone else having any other questions?
Sir,
No.
that application you have used for like uploading the jar file, the name, what was that name? Mock something. Instead
Huh.
of that, can we use putty?
If you use Putty, then you can upload that file, sir. Okay. Mobile Extreme is having a upload option.
Okay.
Got it?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, guys. We'll see you in tomorrow's class.